the realization that we were in a moment of democratic fragility began to dawn on me in the 2008 financial crisis. And as I looked at the way we handled that, it was so clear that what we were doing in the United States was reflecting the interests of the financial markets and alienating everybody else in our society. I was engaged in that moment in a number of political discussions. I was, for instance, on a phone call at the very beginning before Obama had gotten elected. It was during the final stages of the campaign, and the question was, how should the Democrats respond to the crisis that began in September of 2008? And there were all these people from the big banks and financial markets on the conference call. And I was one of the lonely voices saying, you ought to be also worrying about American workers and American homeowners who are about to lose their homes. And if we just focus on the banks, it won't be a good recovery, and it will be politically disastrous. And they laughed at me. They said, let's be serious. We have to save the banks. And unfortunately, Obama executed that kind of a strategy. And by the time I came a little bit later, 2011, I wrote this article in Vanity Fair called Of the 1%, For the 1%, and By the 1%, echoing Abraham Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, the people, for the people, and by the people, where it seemed to me that we were having a government that was reflecting the top 1%, and that led to my book, The Price of Inequality. And by the time I finished that book, The Price of Inequality, in 2012, it was clear to me that we were sowing a fertile field for a demagogue, and I actually said that in the book, a demagogue like Trump. At that moment, I don't think I had any picture of somebody as dangerous as Trump. It was outside our vision, but that there would be a demagogue seemed to me a very high risk.
So you have this crisis of capitalism in 2008, the most extraordinary crisis since 1929, certainly in the United States. And you have this response, which that's an incredible sort of insight. You're on the same call, I presume, as people like Tim Geithner and,
Bob Rubin and
all the big shots. And of course, Tim Geithner, I think, was ex-Goldman. He ends up being the Treasury Secretary for Obama. So you're on that call, you hear what these guys are saying, and their response is not remotely interested in the sort of the political externalities, the political risks that would entail from their choices. Here's a question, because you've been around a long time, you've seen so many different characters and personalities in politics. There's an argument which is that the statesmen in this country that had the shared experience of the Second World War, and across Europe actually, were terrified of going back to something like that. And there was just a shared understanding that politics can get really nasty really quickly, and we need to avoid that kind of volatility, that kind of downside. And as societies on both sides of the Atlantic, we've lost that inheritance, that kind of collective knowledge. Do you buy that our sort of commercial and political elites simply don't think about the possibility of political chaos, collapse, regimes falling, demagogues?
I think to a large extent, I think that's true. We've had so much political stability, and particularly after World War II, we had decades of shared prosperity where, every group in the population grew, but those at the bottom grew more. And so there was almost out of that period a belief in the American middle class. This is the world that I grew up in. But then I think we didn't fully appreciate what began to happen in the mid 1970s, and then really strikingly with 1980, Ronald Reagan, neoliberalism. And that was really a major departure from that post-World War II quarter century of social solidarity, high taxes to on the rich, but a kind of solidarity of our society on the whole. And that neoliberalism brought down the taxes at the top, deregulated, you might say, let the market rip. And it did. And the result, we had growing inequality, we had financial crisis after financial crisis. It wasn't the pretty picture that they had promised. It was really quite the contrary: slower growth, more instability, more inequality. But we didn't notice it. They bought the Kool-Aid so strongly that even as the data was coming in and said, this experiment is not going well, like any religious cult, they said, give it more time. Give it more time. And as time went on, we had another crisis in 2008. The economic divide got greater. Life expectancy in the United States started to decline. And finally, the vision that I had seen of a demagogue arising out of this fertile field of despair became a reality.
Do you blame the Obama administration for Trump then? Because it sounds like they took certain choices which kind of made this somewhat inevitable.
I think the problem started earlier than Obama. I have to say, I think the problem started in some sense even under Carter, where the deregulation began. Clinton continued that, big financial deregulation, lowered the taxes on capital gains, which is the major source of income for the very, very wealthy. So the tax policy that increased inequality was part of Clinton's agenda. But by the time of Obama, it was clear where we were going. No excuse. So yes, in the end, I do blame Obama in a couple of ways. First, he did have one achievement, and that was Obamacare, which is the health care for the large numbers of Americans who didn't have health insurance. That was an achievement. It had, in the design, there were a number of mistakes. One of the things I had advocated was what was called the public option. So if the private sector didn't give what people wanted and needed, there would be a public option. That was thrown out under the influence of the health insurance companies that didn't want competition. And the fact that they didn't want competition should have told us something, that they were afraid of the public option. But that was an important success overall. But the way he handled the bank bailouts, the failures in helping individuals with mortgages, the insufficiency of the recovery packages, the failure to do anything about climate change, and politically, the failure to America's a federal system where what happens at the state and local level is really important. He didn't strengthen our state parties, our local parties, and meanwhile, the Republican Party was shoring up what was going on at state and local level. And so it left the political system more vulnerable and it left our economic system more vulnerable.